Hi, welcome back to Frank's Final Review. This week we're going to be reviewing an album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and this is their third album called Electric Ladyland. It's a very interesting album. We're going to be talking about this today and what was going on sort of behind the scenes and in between the tracks. This album, initially the recording in earnest began in late December of 1967, but Jimi had recorded a track or two going back to June of 1967 in between his Are You Experienced album and his second album, Axis Boldest Love. But I want to dive right into the album. Electric Ladyland, again, Jimi's third album, recorded at Olympic Studios in London and mostly at the Record Plant in New York City. And I just wanted to mention quickly before we begin that, Jimi had been touring extensively in early 1968. 1968 may have been his busiest year in terms of touring. Essentially had established himself in England and Europe in 1967, and he did do 2 months of shows here in the U.S. I've mentioned that in previous videos, but in 1968 is when Jimi first came and did his first headlining tours in the U.S., for example, in February, March, April, and did some shows in May of 1968, and then played a pretty extensive late summer, early fall tour, late July into August, September. He had October off, played the whole month of November, and I think one show in December in Chicago to end the year on the road. But just a really extensive, very exhausting tours. But Jimi was on the rise in popularity and on so many levels. His musicianship. And this album, Electric Ladyland, is really a good reflection of that. It's like a diary, if you will, of Jimi's life at the time and the experience with Mitch and Noel. And Chaz Chandler as well. So we're going to talk about that. So the album opens with a track called "In the Gods Made Love." Interesting title. And, it's very psychedelic. There's a lot of, the track starts off with a boom boom. It's like almost like a knock at the door kind of. And then there's like slow droned out voices, other effects, and these other just really weird sonic frequencies that kind of fade in and out. And this track goes back to December 21st of 1967 at Olympic Studios. As I mentioned, that's when Jimi first began recording tracks for Electric Ladyland. So this opening track, "In the Gods Made Love," and again, it's very experimental. It goes back to December of 1967 in London. The next song on the album, "Have You Ever Been to Electric Ladyland?" This one was interesting to me. It kind of reminded me of a soul tune. It had some higher harmonies, and I could hear Jimi on the bass. This track was recorded in June of 1968, and I know at that time Jimi and Noel Redding were just having difficulty working together in the studio, and having some other interpersonal communication issues, if you will. So essentially, Jimi ended up playing a lot of the bass on this album. Noel absolutely played bass on this album as well, and we'll touch base on those tracks. But here it's Jimi. And some of the lines are interesting. I'm going to talk about some of the lyrics on this album. One of the lines, "Electric woman waits for you and me. I see the love land." There's some more interesting guitar by Jimi, more interesting guitar lines. And to me, it was, if you've heard the album, and this track first appeared on Paul Ador's 1974 compilation album called "Loose Ends." And I remember seeing a really cool video of John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers playing this song And I'm sure he learned his version from Loose Ends or some other bootleg. But there's also a really cool version on the purple, the Jimi Hendrix purple box set. That's where you can hear the Loose Ends version in its full glory, and you can hear Jimi, and it may be Carrie Gelgren who's doing the callback over the studio, who's in the control room, but you can hear Jimi say Electric Ladyland, the name of the track, so it's kind of cool. Anyway, track 3 on the album is called Crosstown Traffic, and this was recorded, again, going back to those December 1967 sessions at Olympic Studios. This was 2 days before their appearance on the Christmas on Earth rock, sort of a, it was like a pre-festival, if you will, an indoor music festival in London at the time. But Hendrix was there, and there's some great footage of him playing Sgt. Pepper's and Wild Thing and some other songs. But it's great footage. I mean, that footage is 2 days after this was recorded, so it just kind of gives you a nice snapshot of what the band was doing. Right, they're playing this. This is all new stuff. They're recording new stuff in the studio with Chaz. Right, this is album 3 after 2 groundbreaking albums. But to see that footage of them at the Christmas on Earth, it's pretty cool. I first heard this track on the compilation Kiss the Sky. That was my very first. That was my first Jimi Hendrix album. And I love the kazoo. You can hear the kazoo on this track. And, it kind of ties into the idea of Electric Ladyland. Is it a song about groupies? One of the lines, tie your tracks all across your back. I can see you had your fun. Mitch, he's so solid here. He's just, they all sound great. And, you can hear Noel underneath. Even vocally, Noel stands out here where he's, at the very end of the chorus, he's saying traffic, look out. And then there's some audience clapping that's mixed in as the track kind of fades out. But the audience clapping segues right into the fourth track on the album, which is called Voodoo Chile, Chile. And this is a slow blues, a Delta style blues. And we first heard it, it was demoed on some acoustic tapes or some home tapes that Jimi made in the spring of 1968. And again, some of the lines stick out here. The night I was born, the moon turned a fire red. Jimi had been, it was a late night. Jimi had been out at the Scene Club and, essentially recruited Steve Winwood on organ and Jack Cassidy on bass and himself, right? And Mitch Mitchell back to the record plant, and Eddie Kramer was there. In a completely different story, Eddie essentially came over to record with Jimi at the record plant. Gary Kelgren, the founder of the record plant in New York City, phoned Eddie Kramer and said, look, Jimmy's going to be working on his next album. Come over here. You've got the job, basically. So Kramer's, pushing the levels. Eddie Kramer's recording. Mitch is great early on, and there's some really nice organ blasts early on by Winwood, right before Jimmy's, right before the chorus sections. This was early in the morning. This was an early morning session. Literally 5 in the morning. Again, some of the lyrics that I like here that stick out. Again, tying into the Electric Ladyland idea. Well, I make love to you, Lord knows you feel no pain. Yeah, what I say now. And then Mitch is churning, and Winwood, they're starting to pick up for Jimmy's main solo. Jimmy's crying on his guitar. He's got these voodoo bends and screams and cries, and Jimi backs off and takes it down low for Winwood. Winwood comes in with a solo on the organ. Jimi comes back into the fray, and he and Winwood get into a little call and talk with each other, and they're communicating. Studio, there's some some clapping, almost like they wanted the track to sound like a live club. Again, they had just been at the Scene hours before, so they're bringing that that small club scene into the track. There's some nice Delta bends by Jimi, and he really gives the track a real nice sort of Delta blues sound, if you will. And I feel like Jimi, he's obviously known as a great blues player and, a psychedelic guitar player, if you will. But I feel like Jimmy's blues playing and in particular his Delta style that you can hear on this song, Voodoo Chile, right? You can hear it on Hear My Train a Comin'. You can hear it on Machine Gun. And I'm talking specifically about the Delta style. You can hear it on Catfish Blues, right? All these songs and all these songs are played in the key of E, but they're in that Delta tradition. And I feel like Jimi is sort of underrated as a Delta blues guitar player. I mean, he definitely, he's right up there with Sunhouse and, some of the older cats. And even Jimi made a quote, what if they had electric guitars back in the cotton fields and stuff like that. So he was aware of the tradition. Okay, not jumping too far off the tracks, getting back to this one. Jimi has a great tone, and Jimi goes into this real extended trill, and you can hear Steve Winwood. He's playing right over that. It almost sounds like a live gig at this point. I mean, obviously they're playing live at the record plant. Mitch takes a little bit of a solo. He's working his kid over, and Jimi comes back in, and at this point, Winwood sounds like he's got a real Scottish, almost Pink Floyd sound. A Richard Wright sound, if you will. Again, there's more clapping, and then we finally hear Cassidy. This track. It's pretty nuanced, but towards the end, we finally get to hear him, and in some of his lines. So that was kind of cool. And then there's this one last peak, right? All hands on deck. Everyone's. It's like a voodoo march. Mitch again is all over his kit. Winwood adds some more trippy organ, and it's a very extended album. It's sort of indulgent by Jimi. I think it's like 15 minutes. So kind of an interesting take there. And Cassidy is still filling as the track fades, and there's some studio chatter, but pretty impressive side A. Especially with that last track, Voodoo Chile. On to side B, the side opens with a song. This one was written by Noel Redding, Little Miss Strange. And to me, this one had almost sounded like the Allman Brothers when it opened. There was some double down guitars. You could tell Jimi recorded two guitars. Jimi's using different tones. I heard 2 or 3 different tones, different guitars at different stages in the song. And again, Mitch really sticks out. He's just nailing it on this track. And there's a nice switch up, with Noel on rhythm guitar, but pretty good song. It starts off kind of, almost like Beatles-esque kind of stuff, early Beatles stuff, but it's pretty cool. I wish they played more of this stuff live. I mean, they could have really taken this one for a nice walk. The next one is called Long Hot Summer Night. And this kind of, this one was recorded in April 18th, 1967 with Al Kooper on piano. And Jimi sings, "Everybody's on fire. Where are you when it's a hot, cold summer?" And I got the impression again that Jimi might have been on bass on this one too. I feel like his bass style is pretty distinctive, more so than Noel. I just don't feel like Jimi crushed Noel on the bass. Okay, that's it. And then some of the lines here, Jimi sings, "Glad my baby's coming to rescue me, rescue me, rescue me." Rescue me from the heat or boredom. I don't know. And then there's kind of an interesting story because Al Kooper played on this one on piano, and he was fiddling around with one of Jimi's Stratocasters that were always, they were right-handed Strats, upside down and reverse strung. So, I guess Cooper tried to play one and was having difficulty, but anyway, Hendrix had the guitar sent to his house just as a thank you for playing on the track. I love those little stories. The next song on the album is called "Come On," and this actually was the last song recorded for the album. Jimi used this track a lot in his Europe January 1969 tour in Western Europe, Western Germany, and he opened I'd say over half the shows with this song. Half the sets, if you will. But it's an Earl King classic. You know, it's a simple blues out of E. You know, Jimi really accentuates his wah wah guitar with great effect for a solo. You know, you almost get a Sheets of Sound kind of sound from Jimi. And I first heard this track on the Lifelines box set. It was an alternate version, and frankly rocked just as hard as this album version. You know, Jimi. There's one last push, and you can tell before they end the track. And you know, Noel sounds nice here. So this is like the classic experience. And then the track fades. The next song on side B is called Gypsy Eyes. And this one has a cool beat to start. It almost sounds Native American. It's got a kind of a quicker tempo than what you'd hear at a powwow, for example, but it definitely has that signature, if you will. And again, it's tied into Voodoo Child and Voodoo Child Slight Return, in that it's got sort of a delta feel, if you will. It's almost voodoo in its roots, right? I know that I've never seen this on set lists, and you know it may have been teased here and there in songs. I'm sure we'll get to that. But I don't think they ever played it live, you know, and it's such a cool song. I think Jimi might have struggled with it vocally, like in a live setting. And, you know, is this the tune that broke the band? Because, you know, is this the song that broke up the experience? Because Jimi, you know, I read just earlier that, you know, they had done 50 takes of this song, which is, you know, that's, you know, I guess, and sort of it was the peak of his, you know, disagreements with Noel in the studio, and you know, so it was kind of a rough period. So Jimi, you know, again, this is another song where I hear Jimi on bass, and you know, it's another song. You know, this song I remember reading like it's essentially a song for his mom, right, Lucille, because she had gypsy eyes, right? That one picture I think that probably everyone's seen, and the other song that was demoed right around the same time, Angel, you know, that's another song that I think he wrote for his mom, Lucille. But again, it's a really cool riff here, and you know, there's some more tribal sounds for the chorus. You know, there's some nice lines by Jimi near the outro, and again, I hear two guitar tracks sort of playing off each other, and it's interesting. I mean, you don't really hear that even in today's music, where guitar players are experimenting, you know, recording, you know, two different lead guitar tracks that are kind of complementing each other and, you know, snaking around each other. So that's pretty cool. The next song to end side B is called "Burning of the Midnight Lamp," and this is one that goes all the way back to June of 1967. This was recorded in Los Angeles, but this was recorded in June of 1967, and it may have been after a long flight from LA to New York City after Monterey during that 2-month period, or I'm sorry, after that initial Monterey experience, after the initial Monterey appearance, they flew back to New York City, and I think that may have when Jimi got the idea to write this song. I've always enjoyed this song. It didn't do well as a single, but I think live versions of this song hold up pretty well, especially versus the studio version. But I actually like the studio version. There's some backup vocals and more wah-wah by Jimi on this one, and you know, he sings "Loneliness is Such a Drag," and I thought the mix here was kind of weird, really. But like I said, live versions always sound better, and again, Mitch is just killing it as always. Okay, opening up on side C, we have a song called "Rainy Day Dream Away." This one opens with Jimi coughing. You know, it's kind of funny, and he has Mike Finnegan on organ on this track, and this one was written in the limousine when Jimi was at the Miami Pop Festival in May of 1968, May 17th or 18th. But he had played the first day, and the second day he went to play, and essentially it got rained out. You know, they had a huge thunderstorm, and Jimmy's in the limousine with Eddie Kramer, and then he was, you know, he had his little sketch pad or lyric pad or whatever, and so he wrote the song "Rainy Day Dream Away" while they were sitting in the limo. So there's a nice break into the vocals here, and some of the lines, "lay back and groove on a rainy day." I mean, I listen to this sometimes on rainy days on Spotify or whatever. It's a fun rainy song if you want to make a rainy day playlist, if you will. And it's interesting because I found one quote related to this song in particular, where Jimmy's talking to Mike Finnegan on the organ, and he says, "We're going to do a slow shuffle in D. You be Jimmy Smith and I'll be Kenny Burrell." The Blue Note guys. But it's interesting. I mean, I know Jimmy obviously. I don't know. I think this track. I mean, it's a great track, but I feel like if Jimmy even used more octaves on this track, like to give it that. Although Kenny Burrell wasn't really an octave guy, but not like Wes Montgomery. But I feel like if Jimmy used octaves on this song, it would have taken it up another level. Okay, the next song on side C, and the next two songs in particular here, 1983, "A Merman, I Should Turn to Be," and then the jam that comes out of that, "Moon Turn the Tides Gently Away." I love these songs. These are great songs. So I want to jump into 1983, "A Merman, I Should Turn to Be." Again, that was demoed earlier in the spring on one of Jimmy's home recorders. And this track is Jimmy at his most experimental. He's some of the lines, "I'm from a land battered and torn." He sings about the Arctic stains, turning Arctic blue to bloody red from pollution and industrialization. And then there's some really trippy effects underneath. Eddie Kramer has talked about, mixing this track with Jimmy and how it was all hands on deck. They were both mixing, and it was, the way Eddie described it, the mix, the mix itself was an improvisation. They were working with so much, and so much was going on. I mean, that became an improvisation. So that's kind of interesting. There's some nice bass work. Again, Jimmy, you can tell it's Jimmy on the bass, with that vocal refrain, the out of style. Jimmy solos for the outro, and just the whole trippiness of this track continues with cymbals and bells. And then there is a sort of a transition to the beginning of "Moon Turn the Tides Gently Away," sort of the jam piece of 1983. And I just want to preface this part by saying this is some of my favorite Jimi Hendrix music. When I first heard this, it was truly mind-blowing to hear Jimmy play in more of a consonant style versus a dissonant style. I think he was tapping into more consonant modes of music, if you will. So there's some really trippy, beautiful lines by Jimmy to start. And again, he's playing his own bass, so he's matching those guitar lines with bass, and it's really Jimmy at his most expressive. There's some more great guitar lines and bass, and there's some flute, also some very subtle flute, more ascending lines by Jimmy, some nice percussion breaks by Mitch. It sounds very much like Mitch. I've seen pictures of Jimmy on the drums, but this is definitely Mitch. And the feedback's kind of oscillating, just so you can hear the bass and drums. Jimmy comes in a little more bluesy this time, followed by more great bass by himself because he was, doing a lot of multi-tracking on this one. There's some nice bass chordings into sort of a moon march, if you will, that's led by Mitch. And then we hear more bluesy and rock styles by Jimmy. More screams and crying from the guitar, and there's a sort of a tempo increase. There's more dramatic drumming by Mitch, and then Jimmy reprises that 1983 verse style, and some great outro lines by Jimmy as well. And I was hearing these great majestic dual lines by Jimmy at this point, really pouring it on, and same as Mitch was really pouring it on. And then you can hear these almost seagull sounds that Jimmy was getting. Right, it is a song about the ocean, sort of the idea of Neptune, and Jimmy's definitely an aquatic song. So to hear the seagulls kind of mixed in was pretty cool. And the way Jimmy and Eddie were doing it, it's sort of this the circular oscillating sound. It to me it sounded like what an alien ship might sound like after 3 or 4 passes, before it finally flies away. So very experimental track, but really an amazing track. Definitely recommend listening to it. And then let's go to the last side of Electric Ladyland on side D. We get a reprise of Still Raining, Still Dreaming. And this one's actually a little more fiery. I feel like, there's less chatter and more wah-wah lines by Jimi and more strong organ by Mike Finnegan. And, there's more of a vamp here on this one. And Jimi's, it just has more of a live feel. The next track on side D, House Burning Down. And this one I'm not really familiar with. I mean, obviously I know what the song is and what it's about. It's just a song that I don't really listen to a lot. So when I do listen to it, it's almost like hearing it for the first time, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. This song obviously was inspired by what Jimi was seeing on the road, right, in the spring of 1968 riots in American cities, in Detroit and Newark, and especially after after the assassination of Martin Luther King. There were lots of riots. So Jimi, Mitch, and Noel were seeing this on the road. They were playing in a lot of cities, and so that's really what inspired this song. There's some interesting verse sections, some really interesting guitar. You can hear some of the lyrics. Someone's house is burning down, down, down. There's 2 guitars again chasing each other here, and to me, this song in particular kind of foreshadowed Jimi's Band of Gypsies period. It was, to me, sort of had a soul, like a soul music, sort of feel, if you will, like a lot of some of the Band of Gypsy stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and some really fiery outro lines by Jimi on this one, and just some more tripped out effects for the outro guitar. The next song on side D, All Along the Watchtower, obviously a major highlight on the album, and just in sort of cementing Jimi's status as a legend in terms of music. This song has just got it all, really. And this one was recorded back in January 21st, 1968, so almost a month after they began sessions for Electric Ladyland in London. So this was one month in. Jimi had his friend Dave Mason play on this one on 12-string acoustic guitar. And then, I remember hearing a story about Kathy Etchingham, Jimi's girlfriend at the time. They were pretty close with Brian Jones and his wife, and they were all together when they heard Dylan's John Wesley Harding album, which is where All Along the Watchtower comes from. So Jimi was, obviously smitten. It's important to note as well that Jimi would receive recordings from Bob Dylan's manager, Grossman, and he listened to Dylan's recordings. I'm not sure if that's how he learned All Along the Watchtower, if he just covered it from, just hearing it on the record. It's a great song. So I hear some brilliant use of a slide by Jimi, and it could be a ring. I'm not sure. Just more brilliant leads, and Jimi's got a really nice descending rhythm style on his guitar, and some of the lines, outside in the cold distance, a wildcat did growl. Jimi's just absolutely killing it on the bass here. Again, this is another song where he's playing bass, and just some of his more brilliant studio guitar solos. I think All Along the Watchtower has almost all of them. I mean, I've heard Eddie Van Halen in particular talking about this song and some of Jimi's lines in this song. So anyway, it's just a great song. Whenever I hear it, I get pumped up. And going back to that January Europe 1969, he did play a couple versions on that tour. A lot of times the audience wanted to hear it. I mean, I think it was a lot of Hendrix fans' favorite song. It charted pretty well. I think it was his only Billboard single that went pretty high. I think it went up to number 6, or still pretty good for Hendrix. So a lot of people knew the song. It was on the radio, and it still is on the radio. So, but people wanted to hear it live, and a lot of times, Jimmy would say, "Oh, we forgot the words" or whatever. He really had to be in the mood. But in 1970, he actually played it more than a few times, more than probably in 1969. Anyway, getting back to the album, the last track on side D is called Voodoo Child. And this one was recorded the day after we heard the slow blues earlier, Voodoo Chile, Chile. This is Voodoo Child, Child, Voodoo Child Sleigh Return. And this one obviously is a lot faster than Voodoo Child. It's similar in structure, there's that first position delta bend. And this one, the lyrics are, a little more transcendental, standing next to a mountain, chop it down with the edge of my hand. There's just some amazing soloing. Again, just like All Along the Watchtower, this Voodoo Child is one of the triumphs of the Jimi Hendrix experience in the studio and live. They use this. They close so many live shows with Voodoo Child. It's such a scintillating song, and it's I could probably do a whole episode talking about versions of Voodoo Child, but the studio version is pretty amazing. And again, going back to Lifelines, there was an alternate version on Lifelines. I love that version. That's one of the first ones that I heard. I think Jimmy goes double or triple time. They're just so on, and I just wanted to mention, when Jimmy's doing those voodoo bends, he's bending the string, right? He's bending the string, 2 positions, maybe 2.5, but he's also, he's manipulating his tremolo bar, but he's also hitting his toggle switch. So that's kind of a cool technique that he had. So, I just wanted to say overall, this was a really great, fun listen, to hear some of the underrated tracks that I generally don't really hear that often, even the opening track, The Gods Made Love, that was cool. But even Noel's song, Little Miss Strange. I wish Noel did more. He definitely, he had his struggles as well, but that was a cool song, and I feel like Noel definitely could have kept writing and playing more and doing more musically. 1983, Moon Turns the Tide. Moon Turn the Tide's just a great song. I feel like if I had to pick one song on Electric Ladyland, it would be that series, the 1983 Into the Moon Turn the Tides, because it's really experimental, and Jimmy's playing some really beautiful stuff, right? I remember hearing it for the first time, and it that song, especially Moon Turn the Tides, with some of that consonant guitar playing, that had a huge impact. That had a huge impact on me as a guitar player. I wanted to play that way. I wanted to have that style. That, and so in a lot of ways, it ended up. I ended up learning. It was sort of a doorway into the major scale, right? I think Jimmy was playing a lot of major scale as well. So really just a really cool, very experimental track. And I wanted to touch base a little bit on the themes. There's some, the album is called Electric Ladyland, and, we hear there were a lot of themes about women on the album, right? We hear Rescue Me and Long Hot Summer Night, Rescue Me. He's talking about his girlfriend. And Crosstown Traffic, right? He's talking about groupies, and he's trying to go to the studio. He's trying to do something, and he's getting intercepted by women. There was another song, I Want to Show You, that was part of the chorus. That may have been Long Hot Summer Night. Gipsy Eye, right? A song about his mom. Little Miss Strange. That's Noel's song, but again, it's about a woman, right? Little Miss Strange. So there were a lot of, quite a few songs about women on this Electric Ladyland album. So, yeah, highly recommend it. This one I got from the 2018 box set, the 50th anniversary. Just a great production here. I recommend this version. There are versions everywhere. You go to a record store, you're going to find an older version, and you might find a newer version. But they're definitely out there. But yeah, I recommend it. It's a great one, and thanks for tuning in for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. And, feel free to mention anything we talked about today in terms of Electric Ladyland, the period between late December 67 when he started recording the album up until he finished in August of 68. Kind of an interesting period. If talk about your favorite live show from that period as well, whatever. Anyway, I hope you have a great week, and thanks for tuning in, okay? I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Have a great night.